Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, and everything to all of you. I'm Jonathan Alvin, and this is Game Master's Guide, and we are going to do a kind of a special edition, if you will. This is, of course, Christmas Day, and I hope you all got exactly what you wanted for Christmas. I know that I got fuzzy slippers and a really cool robe, so I'm all warm and fuzzy for the holidays. And speaking of warm and fuzzy, with us today we have a very good friend of mine. You know him, you love him. We call him Abletop, but he's also Scott Crandall. Hello, Scott.
Hello, everybody.
Alrighty, so I I gave Scott a bit of a hint of what we're going to talk about today, but I'm going to kind of spring a different context on it than maybe what he thought. Uh, it partially in vengeance because he often challenges me in ways that I don't expect to get challenged, and so this is kind of like turnabout. But also because he almost made me laugh right here at the beginning. So let's get started, shall we? Before we do that, if you haven't yet, follow, like, subscribe, hit all the buttons down below. It makes happy things happen. And if you do subscribe to the Twitch channel, you do get no commercials anymore. So that's a big plus for you there. Alrighty. So I'm going to ask you a very basic question, Scott, and then I'm going to let you have it. Let you have the floor. And that is, we're going to talk about how to play a role-playing game. And realize that I'm setting you up by the way I said the words. How to play a role-playing game. So the first thing we're going to talk about, Scott, is how should one choose a persona to play?
Well, that comes down to ultimately a matter of taste. And I don't mean that literally.
Oh yeah, I think you might.
Okay, maybe a little
ogres
bit
might ogres might be happy about a particularly tasty gnome or whatever.
Well, yes.
But what did you mean when you said it's a matter of taste? We're talking about just for clarification, we're talking about somebody who's never played a role play game before, and they've come to NycosRPG because we said we're going to tell you how to play a role play game.
First rule, honest. Do not get overwhelmed by the amount of choice. Let it envelop you, but do not let it overwhelm. There is a lot, but ultimately what I meant is play what feels, if not exactly right, because there is no right answer ultimately. Play what feels good or not to you in that moment, or at least for that game.
Okay, I think you touched on an important point we hadn't really clarified. I said how to play a role play game, and the trick really is that you're having to play a persona. How do you choose a character to play? The first thing you have to figure out is what kind of a world you are in. So literally, it's what in the world are we doing? And so before we can actually choose a persona, we have to know what the parameters are for that choice. So in other words, you could play a master hacker with 3,000 hours of experience on the most advanced computer systems out there or whatever. But if you're playing in a medieval fantasy setting, you're screwed, right? So it really, so the first thing you have to do, see, I told you I was setting you up. So therefore, in the opening salvo, how do you play a character in a role-play game? First question has to be what?
What type of world/setting are you involved with as a player?
Okay, that's fair. Playing a character that you feel comfortable with is okay. But again, we're talking about somebody who has had zero experience. They are an accountant or a carpenter, and their buddy says, "Hey, come on over. We're going to play a role playing game tonight." What kind
Okay.
of advice can you give that person? You say
To
play,
those,
play something you feel comfortable with, but they're not going to feel comfortable with anything because they have no idea what the hell what they're getting into.
that may be true, but they must have some notion about, like, let's take your medieval setting as an example.
Okay.
Even if you've never played a role playing game, you might know what as an example, basic squire, knight, or even a simple farmer, if that's what you want to play in that moment. I mean, that those are extreme examples, but my point is, even if they've never played a role playing game, there are going to be certain triggers or certain phrases which are going to make them at least somewhat quick and maybe not make a decision right off the cusp, but they'll have some idea, or at least I'd hope so.
Well, rather than bury ourselves too deep in the beginning, uh, I always recommend an old saying my mentor used to use: KISS. Keep it
Yes.
simple, student. You don't want to overstep because you have no idea what you're getting into, but you also don't want to underplay your abilities. So by
Yes.
creating a persona that's going to be the quickest to get into to cross that line, the faster you'll be able to enjoy the game. In other words, if you make the system simple, then you can cross the immersion line from where you know nothing to where you at least know who you are within the framework the fastest. So, rather than saying, well, I want to try an archfey druid of the dragonborn eldrin hybrid, and I want to take a feat in, shape shifting. Yeah, that's way too much, right, for your first session ever. Don't bite off more
Yeah.
than you can chew. So keep it simple, student. Play as simple as you can, because that way you can get into how the mechanics of the world work and move forward from there. Well, then that also leads directly to the next question that, of course, we should have asked from the beginning is what system are we playing in? Because we're going to be playing a character, and we're going to talk a little bit more about that in here a second, but we're talking about playing into a game system. Now, with 50 plus years, I can tell you there are a lot of systems out there. And Scott, how many different game systems do you think that you have been a player or a storyteller in your career?
Hmm. At this point, I'd say 8 to 10
Eight to ten. Give some
as a rough estimate.
give some examples of some of the systems that you've run.
Well, now I have mainly run every single version of D&D. I've done a little bit of Call of Cthulhu and a little bit of Savage World, which are all very, very different flavorings of systems, at least from a mechanical standpoint.
Okay, Savage Worlds though, is that also not a fantasy setting? So you're running the same type of stories, just with a different mechanical bend?
John,
Yes.
Savage Worlds is the early night.
Is the what?
It
Repeat repeat what that was. I
it
didn't hear
can
you.
be anything.
Oh, okay. Okay, so it's an open setting. Gotcha.
Yeah.
Okay. The others, though, I knew that like Dungeons and Dragons, all of the genres, while there were some D20 variants that went afield from the homeworld, so to speak. The concept of most role playing games was just specifically high fantasy in a establishment of a dungeon realm, kind of a, you know, sword and sorcery kind of framework.
Yep.
And even Pathfinder follows that same agenda, only has a much more stringent rules mechanism to make the game feel a little bit more crunchy and a little bit more arguably under the player's control.
Yes, and it, like, I enjoy that, but I kind of don't. Their jump to sci-fi felt very jumpy and clunky to me.
Well, sure. When you take a staff of a well-oiled machine and you say we're making something completely different, let's see what you can do, it's going to have some clunk to it. Even with that, though, you're saying that Starfinder was also one of the game systems that you played?
Yes.
Okay, so
that is
my reason for mentioning those all is that when you are again playing a persona in a story, they're going to be playing into that game system mechanic. So if you, as you mentioned, somebody who is a local farmer in a Dungeons and Dragons, beginning first edition type of game, compared to a farmer who has been working on a hydroponic ship in a starfaring universe, or conversely, you're going to be playing into the system as much as you're playing into the character. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So, again, for the novice, for the guy that's a first time person, what do you think are elements of the playing into the system? What do you think that? How do we define that for them?
Well, can we define first at least the genre, and then go to the system from there? Or
well, that's in essence what we've done. We in our first slide we were talking about playing to the most basic, most simple, easiest to transfer in, but it also inherently carries with it the idea that you're playing into the type of story. And that then leads into playing into the game system, because the way the world works is different from each of those systems when comparing one another. Let me ask kind of a trick question. Is there any difference in the way you play a Pathfinder first level warrior-ish type person and a first level Dungeons and Dragons warrior-ish person, or even a post-apocalyptic dystopian introductory level 1 farmer type persona? Are there any differences between them?
Well, there are some subtle differences. Like, I'd argue that the post-apocalyptic version might have a little bit more familiarity with certain tools because he has to, because of the environment he lives in.
Well, a shovel is a shovel is a shovel, isn't it? Fundamentally.
And why does it have to be a shovel? A blunt instrument is a blunt instrument.
Oh, I would argue that a shovel is a lot better blunt instrument than a parking meter for digging a hole.
Well, yes. But then again, why are you trying to use you know what, that's going into the weeds.
Yeah, I know. That was kind of my point. The reality, the element that I'm trying to trick you into talking about is that playing a character in any of those games is really the same. You just are learning a different vocabulary. You're learning a new set of parameters on what's available. But
That is
the very mechanical process that you as a farmer would use would be the same. You go, okay, I need to plant some seeds. Got the seeds somehow, so now we're going to plant them. Well, what do? We got to dig a hole, right? So it's not a matter of having to open a whole new can of worms in order to do the same job. You might find more clever words. There might be some cool resources that you could add into the story, but whether you call it a spade or a shovel or a entrenching tool, a shovel is a shovel, right?
yes.
And my only reason for asking that is when you go to the next topic, you're going to see that it's going to be along the same kind of line. And by the third slide, you'll have it down pretty good. So I don't want to go there yet. So when we talk about playing into the system, that also means we're playing into the story, right? You have to get from the game master, the story, the director, whatever you want to call them, where the story is going, right? You have to have some idea of what they are attempting to accomplish.
Well, first of all, before you can figure out where the story is going, you kind of have to figure out where the story is in the first place, because if you don't know where the story is, how can you know where the story is going to go? As a first-time player.
That is a really good question. What I know many first-time players who go into analysis paralysis right off the get-go because they have no idea what they're doing. Game master says,
Yeah.
"Okay, your character's been put together. We're ready to go. What are you gonna do?" What does that say about the storyteller? What should the storyteller make sure to include at the beginning, I guess?
Maybe a basic description of the area around you, at least.
Okay, in terms for games creation, for story creation, I always recommend the idea of an establishing shot. This is a term used in the movie business to talk about describing the who, what, when, where, why of the person in the story at the start of the game, to give an idea of what is going on around them, what the climate is like, what the environment is like, what the weather is like, what the conditions are like, etc., so that the players have a frame from which to operate. Assuming that, therefore, you have gotten your frame, what would be the player's first set of actions? What is it that the player should do first?
This feels like a loaded question. Well, the player should get a sense of, just because you know the established shot doesn't mean you know your surroundings.
I'm nodding.
Players should ask questions to better familiarize themselves with their surroundings and then go from there.
Okay, so that is absolutely where I was headed. In my notes, I have the ideas that they need to explore, because even if you're told the facts of the experience, until you actually are walking through the environment and perceiving of the changes in the environment as you do so, you can't really know what is real and what is fiction, so to speak. So it's important for the game master to give the players opportunity to explore, to walk around in the framework, to get their feet wet. Pardon me just a second. Just a second. Something went down the wrong windpipe. Hang on a second.
I hate that.
Never eat corn chips. Never to eat corn chips during a talk show. All right. Okay, we're going to role play. You taking over, Scott. Go ahead and talk for a bit.
All right. So yes, as John just said, explore, ask questions, try to at least figure out a more detailed sense of your surroundings, and then go from there. Now, hopefully, there's nothing in your surroundings that, that immediately means to do your persona harm. That can be a very stressful situation. However, I know quite a few DMs, myself included, that do like to do that.
All right.
Putting
So putting in a position of exploration, I think the key we're looking here is that right from the beginning, play in your surroundings, and that is test things, see what the limits are. It doesn't mean you can necessarily have to go, you only live once and throw yourself out of a window, to test gravity. Although I've had players do that.
yes,
we both watched that happen much to our chagrin. Well, there goes our newest asset right out the window. I guess we'll get another one of them here in a minute when they create their new character, their new character. But I think that you'll catch the theme here that the key to playing a role play game is to begin playing. So we're playing around with the character, finding out what's the simplest, what's the quickest way to get into the environment, and then we're going to play into the game system to see what its limitations and boundaries are. So now this is going to be the fun one. I'm going to make a statement, and you tell me what you think that phrase means. I introduce a group of players to a situation. I give them a full briefing on their establishing shot. I tell them where they are, how they're related, how they know each other. And then I say, okay, you are in a tavern of an evening. You're familiar with everybody there, and you've come down and met your friends. Please play this at the tabletop. What do I mean when I say playing it at the tabletop?
what you. Okay, what I think you mean is even though the characters know each other because you established that, the players may not know each other's characters, so you're wanting to give the players a chance to introduce their personas.
Exactly. Have them enter the table playing as if they are in that room. Play at the tabletop. So they are playing as if they are the pieces. If you're a miniatures person and you set up a miniature setup and you said this is your model and that's your model or whatever, you're now playing as if you are in that role on the tabletop. And by playing at the tabletop, the idea is not to drift into conversations about who's dating whom in reality or why you were late to the game session or whatever, but instead to just start playing the personas in that scene. Does that make sense?
Yes, the only personal thing is I get you want to get things moving quick, but people may need like 10 or 15 minutes to decompress after getting to the game. Some groups, not all.
Okay, so just for clarification, I'm only speaking of after that's been the preliminaries are accomplished. I'm saying we're getting together to play a role play game. We only have an amount of time. Let's say we only have our lunch break or whatever, and therefore we've already established our characters. We're ready to play. Once you start the session, then the scene should start at that point, and they're in order to be an effective games group to get a lot accomplished in that period of time, you need to keep the game at the tabletop. Does that make sense?
Yes.
So I think what you're actually hitting on is what would have been our next point. I'm going to go ahead and jump to it real quickly, and that is the idea of playing all the perspectives at the same time. And that's, for a new player, that's overwhelming. The idea of you're playing a miniature on the table, you're playing a rogue in Winterbury or whatever, and you're also playing as the established scout team for a army on the move.
Yeah, that can be a bit much.
And so the trick is that when we are playing a role play game, we're actually playing all three perspectives. And while it seems like a lot, it really isn't if we are able to internalize the role, the persona that we built, the character that we built, because that person is the one who's making all these decisions and having to think in terms of these other characteristics. We do it all the time in our own lives. I mean, if I'm working for a company and I'm working on a project, then I have an understanding of how far along the project we are, who my coworkers are that are working on it, and what is an appropriate time to get together. So that's all already done for me. But that's actually the above the table establishment of when the meeting is going to occur, the at the tabletop coordinating for that meeting to occur, and then finally the in character where we actually have the interactions at that meeting. So that's all three of the perspectives of a game master. Right now, for example, you can't see it, Scott, but I have a part of the map of Nikos in the area around Anchorage, and I was going to use this as an example of how we can look at all three perspectives. We can say that our persona, our characters, are in Anchorage, and we know that that represents a physical space on a map someplace. So in this case, there's this little red star on the map, and that's where Anchorage is. And we know that in the city of Anchorage, there are different structures, and so the game master may have described that your characters are in particular at the center of the moot. And you may know that the moot is a large and civil structure used for the meetings of the various members of the various cultures as they merge together within the city of Anchorage into 36 decisive units, and that your personas are in particular in the waiting chamber of the 34th moot. So therefore, we're looking at this map in all three perspectives. Yes, we see the star. We know that's Anchorage. We see that Anchorage is a part of a larger area that might be known as Cryopathia. And we know that there is a governmental office in that structure that is the 34th moot. And therefore, we're able to get a much more visual, clear picture of where we are in the story by playing all three perspectives. Does that make sense?
Yes. And the true trick is to actually internalize all that, but it might take maybe 6 minutes for... Okay, 6 minutes for an experienced player. I'd say first time, maybe 15. Because, again, first-time players tend to get overwhelmed. Which is not, I'm not saying that it's a bad thing. It's just a factor of being a first-time.
Well, I have found that the amount of overwhelm that occurs has more to do with the speed with which you try to push them through these transitions. If I've described appropriately what is going on in the scene, I can change the amount of time that it takes considerably. But it isn't really even about that. The idea here is that if you're going to play a character, you have to play at all of those different levels at different points in the conversation, because you're simply moving from talking about the meeting to the place to the location to the individuals that are there on an ongoing basis. And so it's learning almost like like playing a slide trombone, to be able to slide up and down these perspective scales and kind of unburden the demand to actually know stuff. In other words, if I describe that location to you, what you know of Cryopathia, Scott, you could tell me where in the realm of Anchorage, I mean, in the realm of Cryopathia, would somebody from the 34th Moot live? What part of the country?
If I'm remembering right, mid-north region.
Exactly. So the the numbers represent the 10% districts clockwise around a compass rose from north back around to north. And so the 34th moot would be pretty close to north. It'd be just 2 points off of north, or 20 degrees off of north. I'm sorry, 60 degrees off of north. So the only point is that when players are learning to play, they have to learn the descriptions. When we were kids and we went outside and played cops and robbers, you had to determine who was playing cops and who was playing robbers, and what was considered to be fair play for crimes. We didn't, we weren't arresting jaywalkers. But before we go too far down that road, and we are coming up on the halfway mark, let me ask you this: are there any wrong ways to role play?
Technically,
that's a loaded question. Is there a wrong way to play role play games?
I'm gonna say no.
Well, whenever you give a statement, go ahead and give it an explanation. Your argument. Why would you say no, that there is not a wrong way to play?
B, there is not a wrong way to play. Because the argument I'm going to give is there is no wrong answer. You are not. This is not a typical game where you are trying to beat someone. It's all about having fun and being part of the experience rather than winning in the traditional sense.
Okay. I'll let this stand for a second, but we're going to come back to that point here in a second. When we talk about role playing, it's not a single person sport. It's generally a group dynamic. Usually you have 3 or 5 or 10 players. And if I were to give a reference to a certain player name, you would immediately get why I asked this question. I would certainly assess that there are certainly wrong ways to play a character. And one of them is by not playing in the character, but instead trying to oversee everybody else's play. And so if you're not playing in the character, in the scene, as that individual, and instead you're judging the way other people are interacting, or accusing them of not thinking about what they're doing or whatever, there are wrong ways to play, which is basically when you're not playing your character, when you're trying to play everybody else's. Does that make sense?
Yes.
I didn't mean to set you up on a trap there, but the idea is that you are absolutely correct. In terms of actions within a game frame, as long as the player is aware of what the mechanics of the game can and cannot do, there is not a wrong way to play any given persona. But it is important to realize that when you are playing, you should be playing and not assessing other people's play, because it's not your job. Now, if you're the storyteller, I suppose you could, but
that gets into another point, though.
Go ahead.
As I said before, the point of this game is not to beat someone. The counterpoint is some players and storytellers do take it to that level. but that's not the intent of it.
Well, I think the easiest way to get out of that dilemma is to say that if you are playing the game to enjoy the experience and try to interpret and understand the world within the framework of what the persona you're playing has to work with, you can still, quote, play to win. You can still try to be the best at your role as possible. You can still try to be the fastest, strongest, smartest person in the room, mechanically utilizing the game mechanics that you're working with. And there's mechanically nothing wrong with that part. It's when you start to look at the other players' interactions and challenge whether or not they are playing to their best potential that we run into problems. So there's no wrong way to play your character, but there is a wrong way to play the game, if you understand what I'm saying. So,
Yes.
Also, there is a level of obtuseness that a player can take on, wherein they are intentionally not understanding the universe, and so they're being rude and off-putting if they're playing for the purpose of trying to break the mechanic. You know, we say that the different game systems have different agendas, and if you are playing a game system like Call of Cthulhu, but you're not doing anything along the ideas of the great old lore, and all you're doing is manipulating people using the rules about sanity, I would challenge you to check your privileges at the door, because you're not playing the same game that the designers created, right? So
Yeah.
But you're never wrong to play the character if you're playing the character. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you about something that I've been thinking about for a while, but I think that the storyteller, game master, dungeon master has been held to a bad rep for a long time. And that is, let's talk about the player game interface. And that is when you are playing a persona in a story, how much agency should you be provided, and how much should be held back by the storyteller?
You should be provided enough agency as a player to make your own choices, but as far as how much could be held back by the storyteller, that is something I don't think I can really answer like quickly, because that varies from story to story, does it not?
It does. As a matter of fact, I think this tiny formula, how much player, how much storyteller, or how much story, how much is the players driven and how much is the story driven, is the equation that makes all of the different genres easier to understand once you kind of are able to put a numeric value into that. In other words, if we are running a survival game, whose agency should the players have to depend on for their livelihood? The storyteller or themselves?
For a survival game, I think it would be more on this. Again, it might go half and half, because yes, the storyteller theoretically has to put stuff for them to find, but then again, the players have to have the wits to find what they need.
Well, I would argue that I set that out there as the first example as a very clearly player related dynamic, because if it wasn't if it was the game master's choice, he didn't have to drop them in the complete center of the wasteland. You see what I'm saying? So,
Yeah.
so therefore, a survivalist game by its nature has to be high, ultra high player agency, and ultra low game master agency, because otherwise the game master could just say, "Yep, you found water. The end." You know, you found civilization. The end. That's that. There's nothing satisfying about that. There's no advancement of the player or the story in that event, really, because it's there's nothing to it. Whereas, let's say you are dropping into the world of Nikos in the middle of the first iteration, and the first shots of warfare are fired. How much of the player agency should go into where they are placed at the beginning of that session?
Um. hmm, Okay.
Obviously, if they have not, they've got zero in terms of local lore knowledge, and they're depending on die rolls to make it through. It's probably not wise to let them be the ones to say, "Oh, drop me in a war zone," or "Oh, put me where all the sec gen are." You know, it really shouldn't be up to them, because they don't know enough to know what questions to ask, right?
Yes, and that goes back to know your setting, kind of.
Exactly, exactly. And I think that's when we talk about the differences between the genres, and like I said, there's something that's just been they came across my thought process recently, was just that very thing, that the player game interface really is the element that determines which is the right way to go in terms of what you should do with your group of adventurers. Well, now when we're talking about as a player, if you are being dropped into a system that is agency is story heavy and player light, what's the best action that a player can do?
I Okay. Story heavy player, right?
Yeah, you've walked in, you know nothing.
Yeah, but that goes back to you know nothing, so find out something.
There you go. So yeah, investigation, inquisition, investigation, observation, listen rather than talk, right? I can't tell you how many times we've had a game session start with a player walking into a situation and talking smack about stuff they have no idea about, and digging themselves such a deep hole that they did.
I'm I have been in some of those situations, both as a player and an observer, and it's always horrifying.
Yeah, horrifying, especially as an observer, as you watch them walk in and start saying stuff about stuff you know that they can't possibly know. Yep, that's always fun. But I mentioned the game interface here because the main point is that the best way to play is to play. Okay, know what your limits are, and hope you can gain more. Alrighty, so I've had players in roleplay games say that the game's experiences at my table have been the best thing they've ever experienced. I've got people who've said that Nycos is the headache they want to have every day. And I've had people say that that they exist on Earth, but they live on Nycos. Um, Regardless of the genre, what is the most surprisingly satisfying element of role playing that you derive from games, regardless of the genre and regardless of this mechanism?
Hmm. I admit it's, for me personally, it's a lot of the times boils down to either well, outwitting someone who I desperately despise, or the rush of victory. But that's my personal experience.
Yeah, no, that makes sense. So it is the places in the game that your agency mattered, right? It's the things that you did in the game that, like you said, got one over on the bad guy, brought about the victory, uh, prevented the bad thing that might have happened, right?
Yes.
Well, I think that's really when we talk about the end of the matter. I guess what I'm going to come back to, I'm going to ask the question now with a different connotation. Given that you've played in dozens and dozens of different game worlds, in dozens and dozens of different genres, um, and regardless of the character in particular that you were playing, would you say there was a wrong way to have played the game? What would be the thing that would make a gameplay experience wrong to you?
There are two scenarios for this,
Mm-hmm.
but both ultimately come down to one simple thing: time management. Neither monopolize time as a player or spend too much time as a storyteller with a player, even if they have, let's just say, 5 different things they want to get done.
Okay, so
A game can.
it's a matter that's a matter of fair play, right? As long as the players are all getting equitable amount of time on the screen, so to speak, everybody's getting the same number of inputs or whatever. But I'm referring more to, is there something that you as a player, when you get done playing, you go, oh, I messed that game up for some other people, or I made some, or there was somebody who did something that overshadowed my ability to enjoy the game. What are those kind of things that you can perceive, or are there any? Is every role play game perfect just because it's a role play game?
No, in fact, no role playing game is perfect. Every system has its quirks that make it work or that make it feel janky depending on the situation.
Mm-hmm.
I guess what it comes down to is don't let anyone shut the game down for everyone.
Mm-hmm. So it's actually the only wrong way to play is to not play, to not be a part of the scene, to either hold back and withhold information that could have helped others, or to have actively undermined somebody else's ability to play. Am I
Yes,
hearing you
but
properly?
to the withholding information bit, sometimes with new players, they're so shy that they allow that to frame their what am I trying to say? Frame influence their decisions. They don't probably mean to hold back information,
Gotcha.
but they can't always help it.
Alrighty. I think that really brings about what I had written down for the parting shots, is that in a role playing game, there are no wrong ideas. So the players can come up with any harebrained idea that they want to attempt in the game frame, and those are never wrong, because there's always a potential to make those situations work, no matter how ridiculous they might be or how outlandish they might be. So it's
Yeah. Oh yeah.
now here we can start you laughing again, and
Some of the crazy things I've seen people do.
oh, do tell,
And
give us a couple.
well, let me try to think. Hmm.
Well, you were enjoying one a minute ago when you were laughing so hard, so. But that's okay.
Well,
Now, not to put you on the spot. Although I have to tell you, that is some of the most fun, is actually putting a player on the spot after they do know stuff. You've given them information. You put them in the scene. You've interacted with them so that you know that they know who knows what they know, and everything. And then watch them twist in the wind. That is
Okay,
precious.
you say twist in the wind. Yes, that is fun, but I think you enjoy that a little bit too much. What I get a kick out of is seeing what new players will come up with that I don't think of,
Ah,
that I don't even see as a possibility until they say it.
yeah,
And unless it's a complete bonkers idea that makes absolutely no sense in the physics of the scene, realm, whatever,
right.
go with it.
Makes sense.
That's
Sure. All right.
some of the best things that I have seen or run as a DM are from players that don't allow themselves to be put in a metaphorical box.
That's true. I think that really comes down to what I wanted you to notice is that in each one of these situations that we've talked about tonight, the proper solution to all of them is to go ahead and play, experiment, investigate, explore, gather information, uh, interpret that information, and then make decisions based on that information, so that the real secret to role play games is playing. Whenever you've got a situation where the drama is getting too much or the situation is becoming too much or whatever, do something, make a choice, and start to play. We'll figure it out as we go along, and I think that's really the element that most of the manufacturers that are out there have forgotten, is that when in doubt, just let the players work it out, because they will figure out a solution you never expected, and will take the story in new and unexpected ways at light speed.
Yeah, and it's both enjoyable, but at least sometimes, and this is me, a little bit, huh, it gives you a moment of pause because you didn't even see that coming.
Right,
And it's great.
right. Well, I want to thank you, Abletop, for being here today. Scott, it's been great having a conversation with you about role play games. And if anybody's watching and likes what we're doing, check out our YouTube channel at NycosRPG. And if you want to become a part of our community, check out patreon.com/Nykos, where you can not only become a supporter of what we're doing in terms of advancing the NycosRPG game system, but also can become an active player in our live stream games on the weekends. I'm Jonathan Albin, the Game Master's Guide. He's Abletop Scott Crandall. I'm glad to have him with us, and we will see you all next week.
Peace out.